Hi, I'm James. This is me again. In this video, I'll be sharing how I will tackle the O-Level Chemistry Paper 2 2025. In the last video, I shared my experience about how I did for the O-Level Chemistry Paper 3, which was a practical paper. So in this video, I'll be sharing with everybody how I will choose to tackle the O-Level Chemistry Paper 2, which is the open-ended section. This video is part of a challenge to see if I can get A1 for O-Level Chemistry just by studying for 24 hours. So this is my plan. This will take up 10 hours or half of Sunday. Firstly, I will look through the SEAB syllabus to identify unsure areas and read up on them. Next, I will jot down the notes on paper. The third step would be to attempt 3 past year papers, and after every paper, I will jot down the areas of improvement and I will read up on them. The notes will be used for quick revision on the exam day itself, just before I enter the exam hall. As you can see, this plan is rather last minute as I do not have much time in my heavy academic schedule to study for this paper, which is the perfect reason why I'm also doing this experiment because I do not have much time at all to study. When I read the SAB syllabus, I realized that there were about 4 key areas that I should focus on. This is assuming that my chemistry foundation on the earlier topics are already okay, so I will focus on the more complex topics. The first would be acid-base chemistry. I will focus on amphoteric oxides, which could be pretty confusing, and solubility rules, as well as QA. And for QA is particularly tricky because unlike the practical experiment, there are no QA notes this time provided. So I will have to memorize all the QA observations by heart, such as when I add NaOH and when I add ammonia, what is the difference? Because for many of these ions, cat ions, there's a pretty big difference in the reactions when NaOH or NH3 is added. The second area to focus on would be on redox chemistry, especially the idea of selective discharge. For example, if it's dilute NaCl, it's like electrolysis of water. So H plus and OH minus would be selectively discharged, and not Na and Cl. Secondly would be concentration effects, and thirdly would be simple cells. Simple cells is pretty related to the reactivity series because it has got to do with the difference in reactivity between different metals. The third area would be periodicity, which particularly of concern is the reactivity series, and therefore I must memorize this reactivity series somewhat. Another one that I think would be an area of concern would be the thermal stability of carbonates. Last but not least, organic chemistry. For O-level organic chemistry, the good thing is that there aren't that many reactions and also functional groups. So in short, I just have to know alkanes, alkenes, alcohols, carboxylic acids, esters, and condensation versus addition reactions. The first past year paper which I did was the 2020 chemistry paper 2. I found that this was generally an easy paper and I finished ahead of time. However, on hindsight, I felt that I might not have wanted to pick this paper because 2020 was the height of the COVID period and therefore certain topics were omitted from the exam scope. So this paper may not have been reflective of the full difficulty of this year's O-level paper and also the scope of the topics. I will now talk about the areas of improvement. For question A2, I needed to know that the idea of activation energy was needed to explain effective collisions also. And I was also not very familiar with the formation of acid rain for NO2 chemical equation. So this is an area that I should work on. For question A4, I found that one of my weaknesses was on electrochemistry. I was not very sure about the electroplating of an iron can what are the electrodes and the electrolyte. From this, I found out that the cathode is iron can, anode is a tin, and the electrolyte is the concentrated iron 2 nitrate. Basically, the tin will get oxidized at the anode to form the tin ions, and then get reduced at the cathode, which is the iron can, and therefore the iron can will get coated with the tin. The electrolyte must be concentrated iron 2 nitrate so that the concentration effects can make sure that the ion is selectively discharged at the cathode. The next one would be about addition polymerization as well as condensation polymerization. I learned the difference between these two is that addition polymerization doesn't give a smaller byproduct molecule, unlike condensation polymerization. And as for question B9 or I found out that calcium sulfate is insoluble, so I should read up further on the solubility rules. And I think this is about QA, so it's something that I'm also not extremely familiar about, and I'm prepared to lose some marks on that. The second paper that I tried was the 2023 Chemistry Paper 2. The paper is considered difficult and the questions take more time to understand, and therefore I finished only on the dot when I was self-timing. I checked out on Reddit, and yet that was a pretty difficult year as many people were complaining about the paper and being unable to finish, as well as this paper had a lot of very unfamiliar questions which caught people off guard. For question A2, this question is about electrolysis again, and in this question, it is about the electrolysis of silver nitrate. Again, selective discharge is a concept that I was not very familiar about, and only after that practice paper I read out further and I realized that selective discharge means that less reactive cations get discharged first and more reactive anions get discharged first. So this was an important concept that I failed to understand on the first go, and it was only after this paper that I understood. For question A3, it talked about the formation of slag during the iron smelting. For this, I found that it was pretty complicated, and I thought that it was not very likely to come out for the actual paper, and I was prepared to give out marks if it came out. So therefore, I didn't try too hard to try to understand it. And as for question A6, I learned how to draw the repeating unit correctly for the monomer. For question B9 either, what I found that I was not very familiar with was about the test for nitrate. This has got to do with QA, which is an area that I admit that I'm probably weaker in, especially now there are no notes for QA analysis, and therefore I must memorize the full thing. About the test for nitrate, it is to add aqueous NaOH, then add aluminum foil and heat gently. And as for question B9, either the other part was that I didn't realize that copper doesn't react with steam. I find that this may be a bit hard to memorize and commit to memory, so I'm prepared to give it up if it came out. For question B9, or I found that it was even more difficult, especially I found that the QA portion required pure memory because the QA tests was with NaOH and NH3 on 3 different ions. So I think that was a pretty big challenge, and I think I would have dropped most of the marks for that part question, which was worth 4 marks. And for question B9 all, I also learned that carbonate stability is higher when the metal reactivity is higher. So it is contrary to what I initially thought. When my initial thinking was that the carbonate stability would be higher when the metal reactivity is lower, which was not true. The last paper that I did was the 2024 Chemistry Paper 2. Generally, I found the paper rather manageable as it was easier than 2023 and it took me less time. But by the time I was already pretty tired because that was already past midnight. So if this trend goes on, maybe the 2025 paper will be more difficult and be similar to the 2023 paper. because this year is an odd year. Generally, I found that there were three questions which I had problems on. Question 4, which was about the Haber process and the conditions used. I was not very sure about the conditions for the Haber process, so I lost some marks there, but I was able to get some marks because I was able to use my logic to smoke up some explanation on that. For question 7, it was about removing pollutants, and the part question which I found it most difficult was the one about the nitrogen dioxide and calcium carbonate reaction. It was the chemical equation and I found it pretty difficult to balance. Only after checking the answer sheet, then I realized that there were three products instead of two products, and therefore the question was more difficult than I thought. And I think if such a question came out, I would be prepared to give out the marks on that. For question 8, I made careless mistakes on the electrolysis questions again. So this is a part that I must watch out and revise more on. In conclusion, I could answer most questions without too much issues. The explanations could have used more keywords. I feel that this is an area that I could have worked harder on. Another thing that I noticed from doing all these papers that the mistakes were mostly made on the QA and reactivity series questions, which are part of inorganic chemistry. I am prepared to give out some marks there if I cannot fully recall the QA reactions as well as the reactivity series. I also finally understood electrochemistry through doing these three papers. For the less common topics, I'm prepared to give up marks because they are not commonly tested. And since I revised last minute, I should focus on what are the most frequently tested topics rather than those that are tested only once in a blue moon. So, all the best for Wednesday and good luck to all. I hope everybody does well for their chemistry paper too. All the best.